we can see in total we've got just short of 112,000 men. So we've got quite a few to play with. We'll look at individual units as we sort of get further in and start to plan stuff on a local scale. But at the minute, I just want to see big picture stuff. Next thing we're going to see then is, how do I actually win this? Do I have to take some victory locations, or do I have to get a points victory by actually trying to eliminate or destroy as much of my opponent's army as possible? So to do that, I can come up to Info, so the Info tab, have a look at Victory, and then I can see we've got already 600 points, and a minus 4,500 points is a major defeat, minor defeat is 0, minor victory 4,500, and a major victory 9,000. So we do need quite a lot of points. However, there is a lot of troops on this map, even though we can't see them. And by the look of it, there's quite an awful lot of victory locations. Now, victory locations, VPs, or victory points, these are objectives that we have to take, and they're represented by a nation's flag. So all these little mini Russian flags here will represent a victory location. So you can see here that's 500 points for taking that objective. If we have a look at another one, that's 250 points. So I'm going to give my priority to any high value, high point victory points. If I was to hold down the shift key, continuing on this big picture of the battle if you like, if we hold down the shift key, we can actually start to see place names as well. So we've got the village of Borodino up there, the Semenskaya redoubts there, the new Moscow Road, etc, etc. And Dorodino down there. Release the shift and those places go. So that's going to help you when you've got that printed map out, you start annotating it and making notes and things like that. The other thing we can do is come up here and put view leaders on top. I'm going to start to have a look at my chain of command now and start to see, it's probably easier in a little bit of a zoomed in mode, and start to have a look at where my leaders actually are. Now from the off, all your leaders will hopefully, represented by the crowns here, be where they should be. Happy days. We can also go to division colours. We go to view division colours, and we can see that our divisions are quite nicely ordered. And remember that key, from when you start to attack, things start to get a bit cluttered, units get all mixed up and things like that. Going back to that show division colours and having a look at your leaders on top will help you to sort of maintain a little bit of order as much as possible. And go there. I don't play with division colours usually, and I don't usually play with my leaders on top. After I've done that then, and I've actually seen the big picture stuff, I've seen large scale where my avenues of approach are. Up here we can see that we're very weak on the left. We've got some cavalry probably, we've got some cavalry up here. And he's pretty strong as well. Now this is us, or as the French, attacking. So it's a defensive battle for the Russians. That doesn't mean that they don't have some mobile reserve somewhere that they can counterattack if there's an opportunity. Now the AI might do that, and that will be based on what actually happened in the historical battle. But if you're against a human player, that comes into prominence even more. They will be smart enough to actually hold a reserve somewhere and react to anything that's going on in the field. To that end, we've also got to start thinking the same. We do not send, generally, all our troops in one big mass attack. Generally, we've got to soften them up with some artillery. So if we zoom in a little bit more, we can start to see now what we're actually doing in local locations, in the village of Borodino there. I've got a site somewhere for my artillery. Artillery is going to give cover and fire, as it does in most warfare. Remember, artillery is very much line of sight, unless you've got howitzers. And we're going to see what everything can see. So we go to the visible hexes column there, or tab, and start to click on some hexes on this high ground, because I want to cover my approach into the village of Borodino, for example. We can cross over a river. We do have the bridge there, so it's not a terrible approach. We have the high ground on this side of the river. And we can start to see where I want to actually sight my artillery and what the artillery can see. That also goes the same with the Russians. We find some artillery in these redoubts down here. We can see that this artillery has a lovely line of sight all the way across that open ground in front of them, masking any approach. So I'm going to have to start to think about how actually could I take this route out. A frontal assault for these troops would involve going through the woods. That's going to slow us down. We're going to get disordered. Coming out, having to deal with this skirmisher line, having to cross a river, having to go up this step on high ground. It's going to take a lot of fatigue. It's going to take a lot of morale out, and potentially they're going to end up disordered when we get here. But it's not a bad place to actually stay and sort themselves out while they're protected from this cannon fire. However, this open ground here is going to potentially cause a lot of problems because the Russians had quite a few big, heavy guns in these locations. I would potentially think of this, or having to deal with this, as a flank attack. Other considerations I would make, especially if we've got disparity in numbers, is there anywhere that I can make a concentration in force? I may have less troops on the battlefield in general. However, that doesn't mean that there may be an opportunity, a weak point in the enemy's line of sight, that I can bring all my troops to bear, or a great number of troops, and have an advantage, or local advantage, in one place. Napoleon did that quite a lot, especially when he didn't have the numbers that his opponent did. We can basically concentrate our forces in one place, and then we can use that numerical advantage, as we probably have at Borodino here, though we do have, I would say. The other thing we've got to consider is our cavalry. How are we going to use our cavalry? So we've got these cavalry up on the left, and they're light cavalry, so they'll be quite good for scouting, I would say, in this case. There's a lot of open ground there, but just to protect our flank, I want to spread them out into squadrons and use them as scouts. Don't really want to involve them in combat, just because they're light cavalry. We have a look at some heavy cavalry. Okay, these are lights again, but we have some heavy cavalry somewhere. These cuirassiers. How are we going to utilise our cavalry? Do we want them to be act as a mobile reserve, just in case the Russians do counterattack and break through, so we can respond to that? Or do we want to follow up the infantry and the artillery and exploit any advantage that we might have? Cavalry, especially heavy cavalry and light cavalry to an extent, if we start pushing units back and the enemy start to rout and basically get disordered, chasing up with cavalry is the ideal opportunity to use them. You'll get maximum effect from your casualty. Using them as an offensive unit, you've got to be very, very careful. Also, we've got to consider, do we want to use them piecemeal when they're all sort of spread out over the battlefield? Or do we want to concentrate our cavalry in force and have potentially a larger mass cavalry charge? Completely up to you on the day. Cavalry, don't forget, they also get affected by terrain and things like that. So we've got to sort these guys out, knowing that if we cross the marsh and things like that, it's going to disorder us. We need, for cavalry, ideally, large, wide open spaces. Infantry-wise then, we want to put out a skirmisher line to act as a vanguard. And they're going to be within maybe 2 or 3 hexes ahead, so that these skirmishers are going to have to deal with our skirmish line before they deal with our sort of main body of troops. Then I can start going on a more local scale, as we did with Borodino, just to finish that off. We've got some cavalry here. Where's Borodino gone? Press the jump map and we can go back up to Borodino. Okay, he's got a skirmish line there. We can start to think about how we're going to deal with those skirmishers. I wouldn't be too worried about those skirmishers. Their job isn't to stop our advance, it's just to delay and disrupt our advance. So we're going to do the same thing. I would put out a skirmish line from here to deal with those skirmishers, hopefully put them back until I can get a body of infantry, possibly some follow-up cavalry, if I had any around here. And make sure we've got things like our supply wagons following up on the main roads as well. Bring our artillery up to better ground up here. And that's generally how I would approach a large-scale battle. So try to get some historical context. Have a little read of it if you want to. I strongly suggest in any case getting a high-quality map, just so you can annotate it and mark it. Some of these terms on the large-scale battles can run into hours to actually do them properly. And the first turn, by the time you've actually had a look at everybody's avenue of approach, you've surveyed, line of sight, and you've had a look at avenues of approach for everybody, and decided what you actually want to do. And there's no right or wrong answer. If you do start playing human opponents, some people do have a very I'm going to say unrealistic method of playing, where they'll just bunch everybody up into mass stacked units of cavalry, mass stacked units of infantry, and just absolutely blitz you. It's actually harder to play sometimes against players like that than it is to play against players who sort of play in a historical manner, if you like, because it wasn't done in the day, and armies back in the day, in the age of Napoleon, weren't designed, and their doctrine wasn't actually designed to deal with those 2,000 massed cavalry or 2,000 massed infantry in one go. So it depends on who you're playing. Well, there we go. Well, thanks for watching, and hopefully you've learned something about how to approach one of these large-scale battles. It all comes with practice. When you're moving around units and things like that as well, it becomes second nature. And remember, there are ways to move a little bit quicker and move lots of infantry and units quicker, rather than just clicking individual right hexes. I'm a little bit of a narcissist in that sense. I don't mind actually doing that. It takes me back to my boyhood days of playing with toy soldiers and figures and things like that, moving across the carpet, moving them across maps I've made and things like that. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and happy gaming.